Ahoy! Server merges are finally happening. A lot of you have been asking for it, and we are getting various merges, but not necessarily the ones that people asked for, or there is at least a certain degree of controversy surrounding them. So we'll dig into that, and then in the coming days I have an in-depth video on the new OPR map. So first, an overview of the merges that are happening. Taurus, Asterion, Andrometus and Siren are going into Aries. Apus, Phoenix and Sagitta are going into Draco, all of that is EU. And Aaru is going into Nysa, we'll get back to that. In US East, Cathaysia is going into Hudsonland, and Arctica as well as Kalahari are going into Rosa. Also Kenorland and Cimmeria get merged into Pangea. And as the last US East merge, Maramma gets merged into Valhalla. In US West, Bellatrix and Nath get merged into Aquarius. In SA East, Cursa gets merged into Alkaid, and in AP Southeast, Pisces gets merged into Cerberus. Now before we go into more detail about these merges, let's talk about the exact process that's going to be happening here. There's going to be a downtime on the 18th of February with the servers restarting for retiring worlds. Character creation and transfers on those retiring worlds will then be disabled, and wars will be cancelled as well as refunds on retiring worlds. So that is kind of a bridge period, and between the 18th and the 25th, players on retiring worlds will have the option to transfer themselves to another eligible world if you'd rather get merged into another server or you just want to go there straight away. On Tuesday the 25th, access to retiring worlds will be disabled. All characters and companies on retiring worlds will be moved to the new homeworlds. Territories on the retiring worlds will be refunded to the owning companies, and the reimbursement process is initiated for transfer tokens used within the last 14 days before the merges happened. So if you just recently did that, you'll be fine, you get the tokens back. But overall, what we're seeing here are some very strange merges, and there are some complaints about that. Normally what AGS does is merge the smaller worlds into the bigger worlds, which makes sense because those have more players that are in some way at least concerned about the territory ownership, and this time they seem to, in some region at least, have pulled a reversal on that. In the case of AP Southeast, Pisces is getting merged into Cerberus, and as far as really anyone knows, Pisces is the much more active server in comparison. Of course, we no longer have exact player counts for individual worlds, but I know most of the still active AP Southeast population, which is very small, especially after the bans, and of those players, I don't know a single one that went to Cerberus. Pisces was the first server that opened, and that is where most players went, with the exception of some very late arrivals that were hopeful that a second server would survive or just wanted more easy access to resources. And AGS hasn't really given us an explanation as to why they're handling this differently, because of course the impact this way around for warring companies will likely be larger, at least temporarily, because those more competitive companies that are typically on Pisces will lose their territories, whereas the ones on the less competitive servers will have theirs initially, though probably not for long. I don't know if this is on purpose to shake out the war meta, if there's some different technology on those servers, I don't know what it is, but back in the day, Utopia used to have better technology. That was also an AP Southeast server, and they still merged into one with worse technology, Delos at the time. So I can only theorize here, and I'd much rather hear an explanation from AGS themselves. Along with that, there are also complaints, for example, about Aaru and Nysa merging, with the players saying that those servers are fine individually and shouldn't be merged. Now, I'm always very skeptical with those kinds of quote-unquote movements where you suddenly see a lot of protest against a merge when the statistics don't kind of align with what's being said. And that's because we had the same situation in AP a long time ago. There was a server that was really dead, but there was one warring company that insisted that it should not be merged just because they wanted to control the whole server and they wanted to have all the resources for themselves and everything. And that basically resulted in the server dying even more, and a lot of people just dropping the game because there was not enough players there to do anything, only because this one company was spamming the forums at the time saying, no, we really need to keep this separate server, it's really important to have those two because it's more fun, it's more fair, and blah blah blah. And now we're seeing people saying again that kind of the same scenario is the case for them with Aaru Nysa, and I don't know if that's true, because if we're looking at the player stats, pretty much all player populations across all worlds are consistently being shown as low on New World database nowadays, and that's something that can still be tracked. So I can't really imagine these worlds being populated to a degree where a merge wouldn't be reasonable. Even if 2 worlds were hitting medium population, I think it would still be justifiable to merge them just to have a larger world where activities can more easily be done. And I'm telling you, as an AP Southeast player, you'd much rather have a world that's a bit too crowded, where you have more competition in wars, than a world that's too empty, where you can't do basic content anymore. But the Aaru and Nysa situation aside, it looks like across the servers that are getting merged, there are other situations that are similar to AP Southeast, where the bigger servers get merged into smaller servers. One theory I have based on the names is that they're just merging the servers into the ones that have the easier to remember name, but that would also be a bit weird. Something that I think is noteworthy is that at this point it's very easy to quickly create a character on one of the less populated worlds, farm resources there because you can level your gathering skills very quickly nowadays, and import them into the more populated servers and technically make a profit from that. The problem is, again, the population across all worlds is usually shown as low, so even the higher populated worlds aren't really exactly in a state where resources are particularly contested, making the profit that you could realistically make here probably fairly minimal. I also thought that this was interesting to look at. This was posted by Disco Spawn on the New World database Discord. I'm not sure if that's the original source though, but what you can see here is that after the merges, we will basically have almost always just one world for any type of server, with the exception of EU and US East. Another thing here that's interesting is that it seems US East now has a bigger population than Europe, which I think used to be the opposite at some point. As far as I remember, there used to be a very high EU population in the past. And we can also see that there are a ton of servers here that are probably not effectively populated anymore. There's a small mistake here, by the way. Delos is actually the legacy server and Cerberus is the standard server. But if you look at AP Southeast otherwise, you'll have Cerberus as the actually populated server, Delos basically not having enough players to properly do things anymore, and the other servers basically being dead. I mean, maybe there's some people that survived the ban wave on Cathaysia, but the console exclusive servers in those regions just, I don't think, have enough potential to survive at all. And similar things I would assume are probably true for South America and even possibly US West. I'm not sure about the state of the PS-only seasonal servers. I am assuming that this was just some form of contractual requirement to have them for the main regions rather than them actually being filled, assuming this because the seasonal crossplay servers are just down to 1 each anyways. So I can't really imagine massive populations being on these PS-only servers. And in that context, I think for smaller regions like AP Southeast and probably South America, possibly also US West, it would make way more sense to just merge the console servers into the standard servers, the fresh start servers, if that's something they are able to do. I'm assuming that, again, this is a contract thing. They are probably not able to do that, but those worlds just don't stand a chance by themselves. And likewise, I also think for those kinds of worlds, it would be way, way, way better to just merge Legacy into Standard. I know this is always a major point of contention for them, and especially after they just handed out a bunch of bans for transferring between those worlds, I think they are not going to go do that anytime soon, but I still think that it's really stupid for a game that already has a very small player population in those regions. So all in all, I am glad they're doing the merges, even though there are some strange choices in what gets merged into what. But I really wish that they would be able to go further with these merges, just do them more aggressively, so that we can have a somewhat sustainable player population. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. Again, OPR breakdown for the new map tomorrow. And if you'd like to support me further, you can do so on Patreon and get early trading tips in return. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do that, and thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.